There is a simple truth about this planet that every human being tends to forget the moment they step outside their front door and breathe cool, clean air. Earth does not care whether we survive. It never has. For 4.5 billion years, this world has been generating forces so extreme, so indifferent, so fundamentally hostile to carbon-based life, that the very fact of human existence on its surface is, by any scientific measure, an improbable accident. Yet we are here, and in a handful of places scattered across every continent and ocean basin, the Earth is still trying to remind us of that fact. These are not simply dangerous places. They are places where the physics of survival, the temperature your body can tolerate, the air pressure your lungs can handle, the chemistry your skin can resist, collapses entirely. Today we are going to explore 12 of those places. 12 environments so extreme, so unrelenting, so genuinely hellish, that survival there does not bend the rules. It shatters them entirely. Death Valley is recognized as the hottest place on the surface of the Earth where air temperature has been scientifically measured. On July 10, 1913, a weather station at Furnace Creek recorded 134 degrees Fahrenheit, 56.7 degrees Celsius, the highest reliably recorded air temperature in human history. To understand what 134 degrees Fahrenheit does to the human body, consider this. At 104 degrees Fahrenheit, your internal organs begin to fail. At 113 degrees, the cellular proteins that keep your muscles functioning start to denature. They literally cook. At 134 degrees, exposed in direct sunlight with ground temperatures routinely exceeding 200 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than boiling water, a human body loses its ability to sweat faster than it can replace fluid. Dehydration becomes fatal within 2 to 3 hours without shelter. Death Valley sits 282 feet below sea level in a basin surrounded on 3 sides by mountain ranges that trap solar radiation like the inside of a furnace. The valley floor is painted in dark salt flats that absorb over 90% of incoming solar energy. The air above it compresses under its own weight, heating further as it descends. It is a perfect geological heat engine, and it has been running continuously for millions of years. Remarkably, the valley is not empty. Approximately 300 people call Death Valley home year-round, living and working inside the national park. They survive not through adaptation but through total technological dependence. Air conditioning, water trucked in from 200 miles away, and strict schedules that keep humans indoors between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon during summer months. Without those systems, the average unprotected human would begin losing consciousness within 20 minutes. The valley earned its name from the 49ers who crossed it in 1849 seeking California gold. Only one member of that original party died crossing it. The name, it turns out, was more prophetic than accurate, but barely. The Danakil Depression is known as the cruelest intersection of geography on the surface of the Earth. Situated 410 feet below sea level in the northeastern corner of Ethiopia, it sits at the junction of 3 tectonic plates that are actively tearing apart, pulling the land downward, stretching it, cracking it open, and filling those cracks with superheated brine, sulfur, and molten lava. Average daytime temperatures in the Danakil hover around 122 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 degrees Celsius, year-round. Not in summer. Year-round. There is no winter in the Danakil. There is no respite, no season of relief. The wind carries temperatures hot enough to scorch exposed skin within minutes, and the humidity combines with the heat to create a wet bulb temperature, the true measure of what a human body experiences, that routinely exceeds what unprotected physiology can survive. At its center sits Dalol, a hydrothermal field of acid pools colored in neon yellows and alien greens by sulfur compounds and ferrous chlorides. The water in those pools reaches temperatures of 206 degrees Fahrenheit, near boiling. Its pH sits between 0 and 1, making it more acidic than battery acid. A human hand submerged in a Dalo pool would begin dissolving within seconds. And yet, approximately 1,200 members of the Afar people mine salt from the Danakil every single day of the year. They cut slabs of crystallized sodium chloride from the valley floor using hand tools, load them onto camels, and trek 30 miles back to the nearest town. They earn less than $5 per day for this work. They have done this for over 1,000 years. Would you enter one of the most hostile environments on Earth for $5 a day? For the Afar, it is not a question. It is simply Tuesday. The Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia's Far East holds the record as the most volcanically concentrated landmass on the surface of the planet. Within an area approximately the size of California, 160 volcanoes rise from the ground, 29 of which are classified as currently active. At its heart, hidden within a remote river canyon accessible only by helicopter, sits the Valley of Geysers, a 2-mile stretch of Earth from which more than 90 geysers erupt on a continuous measurable schedule. The largest among them, named Velikan, meaning giant, launches columns of superheated water and steam 130 feet into the air every 4 to 5 hours, with a force equivalent to a low-yield explosive detonation. The water leaving the geyser's mouth reaches 212 degrees Fahrenheit, the boiling point of water at sea level. The steam can travel faster than 60 miles per hour. The ground surrounding these geysers is not solid. It is a thin crust of mineral deposits formed over millennia of hydrothermal activity, suspended above networks of boiling water and dissolved silica. In places, this crust is less than 2 inches thick. A single misstep off designated paths leads not to a sprained ankle, but to immersion in water hot enough to cause third-degree burns within 1 second of contact. In June of 2007, a massive landslide triggered by snowmelt buried 2/3 of the valley, filling the river canyon with 15 million cubic meters of debris and dammed water in under 3 minutes. Scientists believed the valley was lost forever. Within 2 years, the geysers had carved new channels through the debris and resumed erupting exactly as before. The Valley of Geysers did not recover. It simply continued, indifferent to the interruption, as it has for the past 10,000 years. The Sahara Desert covers 3.6 million square miles, an area nearly as large as the contiguous United States, making it the largest hot desert on Earth by a margin that no other desert comes close to challenging. Within that vastness, the Algerian interior holds the distinction of being the most consistently brutal. On July 5th, 2018, the city of Ouagla in central Algeria recorded an air temperature of 124.3 degrees Fahrenheit, 51.3 degrees Celsius. This was not a freak reading. It was a confirmation of what climate scientists had been documenting for decades: a persistent mega heat zone forming over Algeria and Libya, where summer temperatures now routinely exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the surface temperature of sand reaches 176 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to fry an egg in under 2 minutes. The Sahara is expanding. Every year, the desert advances southward by approximately 30 miles into the Sahel region below it, consuming agricultural land and water sources. Since 1920, the Sahara has grown by approximately 10%. The expansion is driven by a combination of reduced rainfall, overgrazing, and a feedback loop in which sand-covered land absorbs more heat than vegetated ground, accelerating local warming. In the desert interior, between the eargs, the vast fields of mobile sand dunes that can reach 500 feet in height, a human being without water will begin suffering heat-induced confusion within 4 hours. Unconsciousness follows at 6 hours. At the peak of Algerian summer, survival without shade and water is measured not in days but in hours. How does anything survive in a place where the ground is hotter than a cooking surface? The answer in the deep Sahara is barely, and sometimes not at all. Mount Merapi is recognized as the most active and most dangerous stratovolcano in Southeast Asia and one of the most lethal volcanic systems on Earth. Rising 9,551 feet above the densely populated plains of central Java in Indonesia, it has erupted more than 80 times since detailed records began in 1548, an average of once every 6 years, every single century, without interruption. What makes Merapi uniquely terrifying is not the size of its eruptions, but their behavior. Rather than producing conventional lava flows, Merapi generates pyroclastic density currents, superheated avalanches of gas, ash, and fragmented volcanic rock, traveling at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, with internal temperatures between 570 and 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures and speeds, no physical barrier provides protection. Buildings, vehicles, and vegetation are incinerated in seconds. A human body caught in a pyroclastic current does not burn, it disintegrates. In 2010, Merapi's most violent eruption in over a century killed 353 people, destroyed more than 2,600 homes, and displaced 350,000 residents within 72 hours. The eruption produced pyroclastic flows that traveled 15 kilometers from the summit, well beyond the evacuation zones authorities had established as safe boundaries. Despite this, approximately 1.2 million people lived within direct risk of Merapi's pyroclastic zones, more than any other volcano on Earth. The volcanic soil on Merapi's slopes is among the most fertile on the planet, producing 3 rice harvests per year. Farmers who have lived near the volcano for generations describe its periodic destruction not as a catastrophe, but as a natural cycle of renewal. The mountain last erupted significantly in January of 2021. Volcanologists currently monitor it as showing increased seismic activity. The question for the million people on its slopes is never if Merapi will erupt again, but when. Rotorua, located on New Zealand's North Island, sits directly above one of the most hydrothermally active regions on the surface of the planet. The Taupo volcanic zone, a 185-mile rift in the Earth's crust along which Rotorua is positioned, produces more geothermal heat per square mile than almost any comparable system on Earth, releasing an estimated 4,200 megawatts of thermal energy continuously. The surface expression of this energy is inescapable. Boiling mud pools bubble at temperatures of 212 degrees Fahrenheit across the city limits. Geysers erupt without warning in suburban backyards. The ground itself, in certain residential zones, radiates heat measurable through standard footwear. The air carries permanent concentrations of hydrogen sulfide, the compound responsible for the smell of rotten eggs, at levels that make some areas of the city permanently hazardous for extended outdoor exposure. In 2016, a tourist walking near the Waiotapu thermal area stepped off a designated path and fell through a hydrothermal crust, sustaining severe burns across 80% of his body. The water beneath that crust was 392 degrees Fahrenheit, superheated beyond the normal boiling point due to pressure from the geological systems below. He survived, but required months of critical medical care. What makes Rotorua particularly disorienting is that it looks, from a distance, like an ordinary lakeside city. Hotels, schools, cafes, and residential streets sit within meters of boiling ground. Children walk to school past mud pools. The 70,000 residents of Rotorua have simply normalized the geothermal activity around them in the same way other cities normalize traffic. Would you buy a house beside a boiling mud pool? For 70,000 New Zealanders, that question has already been answered. And the answer is yes. The Atacama Desert is considered the driest non-polar place on the surface of the Earth, a distinction it holds by an extraordinary margin. The average annual rainfall across the Atacama is less than 0.6 inches, approximately one-third the rainfall of the Sahara. In the core of the desert, in the region between the cities of Antofagasta and Calama, some weather stations have recorded zero measurable rainfall for periods exceeding 400 consecutive years. To understand what that level of aridity does to biology, consider that most desert-adapted bacteria cannot survive in the core Atacama. Scientists studying the desert's soil composition have found regions where the concentration of living microorganisms is lower than in samples collected from the surface of Mars. The Chilean Atacama is, in certain documented locations, the most lifeless patch of ground on this planet. The Atacama sits between two mountain ranges, the Andes to the east and the Chilean coastal range to the west, which together create a double rain shadow. Pacific moisture is blocked by the coastal range. Atlantic moisture is blocked by the Andes. What reaches the desert floor is air so thoroughly drained of humidity that exposed metal corrodes at a fraction of the rate it would anywhere else on Earth. Some of the astronomical observatories built in the Atacama require no waterproofing at all, because rain poses no meaningful statistical risk. In the valleys of the core Atacama, mummified human remains have been found that are over 9,000 years old, preserved not by intentional embalming, but simply by the desert's absolute refusal to allow biological decomposition to proceed. The conditions that kill life here preserve it indefinitely after death. The Atacama does not destroy. It simply stops everything. The Dead Sea, situated on the border between Jordan, Israel, and the West Bank, holds the record as the lowest point on dry land anywhere on Earth. Its surface sits 1,412 feet below sea level, more than a quarter mile beneath the surface of the ocean, in a depression that has been sinking for approximately 25 million years as the African and Arabian tectonic plates pull apart beneath it. The water itself is approximately 9 times saltier than ocean water, with a salinity of 33.7%. At that concentration, no fish, no seaweed, no coral, no visible aquatic life of any kind can exist. The name Dead Sea is, for once, entirely accurate. The salt concentration is so high that a human body cannot sink. The water's density exceeds that of human tissue, making drowning by submersion technically impossible. What is possible, and has killed multiple swimmers, is inhaling the water. At 33.7% salinity, accidentally swallowing Dead Sea water causes immediate laryngospasm. The airway involuntarily closes, followed by pulmonary edema and respiratory failure. The Dead Sea is shrinking. Since the 1960s, when Jordan and Israel began diverting the Jordan River, its primary source of fresh water, for agricultural use, the sea has receded by approximately 1 meter per year. Since 1976, it has lost 1/3 of its total surface area. As the water evaporates, it leaves behind salt deposits that collapse into sudden sinkholes, some appearing overnight, swallowing roads and infrastructure without warning. More than 3,000 sinkholes have been documented along the Dead Sea shoreline in the past 30 years. Entire sections of former beach have been declared permanently off-limits because the ground beneath them can collapse without warning. Even the act of standing beside this dying sea carries measurable risk. Beneath Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming lies one of the most powerful geological systems on the planet. A supervolcano whose magma chamber spans approximately 55 miles in length, 20 miles in width, and up to 9 miles in depth. It has erupted catastrophically 3 times in the past 2.1 million years. Its most recent major eruption, approximately 640,000 years ago, ejected 240 cubic miles of material into the atmosphere, enough to bury the entire state of Texas under 10 feet of volcanic debris. The ground at Yellowstone rises and falls by as much as 3 inches per year as magma pulses beneath it. More than 10,000 hydrothermal features, geysers, hot springs, fumaroles, and mud pots vent heat from the magma chamber directly to the surface. The Grand Prismatic Spring, the park's largest hot spring, maintains a water temperature of 161 degrees Fahrenheit at its center and spans 370 feet in diameter, larger than a football field. Seismologists have recorded over 3,000 small earthquakes at Yellowstone in a single year, most too small to be felt without instruments. The park itself is not on top of a volcano in the conventional sense. The park is the caldera, the collapsed summit of a system so vast that only when viewed from orbit does its true circular structure become visible. If Yellowstone were to erupt at the scale of its largest historical events, the immediate destruction radius would encompass most of the western United States. The subsequent injection of volcanic particulate into the stratosphere would reduce global temperatures by an estimated 10 degrees Celsius for up to a decade. Did you know that the most visited national park in America sits directly above a system capable of reshaping global civilization? 2 million tourists visit Yellowstone each year. The magma does not notice. Svalbard is an archipelago of Norwegian islands situated 500 miles north of mainland Norway at a latitude of 78 degrees north, placing it deep within the Arctic Circle, less than 600 miles from the geographic North Pole. It is one of the northernmost permanently inhabited places on Earth, home to approximately 2,600 people, and it holds the distinction of being the world's fastest warming location. Since 1971, average temperatures in Svalbard have risen by 7 degrees Celsius, nearly 4 times the global average warming rate. In 2020, Svalbard recorded its highest temperature in documented history, 21.7 degrees Celsius, 71 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that would have been considered impossible by climate standards 1 generation ago. The warming has accelerated glacial retreat. Svalbard has lost approximately 60% of its glacier volume since 1900. Despite this warming, Svalbard's winters remain among the most extreme on Earth. From November through January, the sun does not rise above the horizon at all. Temperatures plunge to -31 degrees Fahrenheit, -35 Celsius. For 4 consecutive months each year, the island operates in conditions of total darkness and temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 5 minutes. In Svalbard's main settlement, Longyearbyen, it is technically illegal to die, not because of any superstition, but because the permafrost in which the town's cemetery is embedded preserves bodies indefinitely, preventing natural decomposition. When the cemetery reached capacity in the 1950s, authorities simply stopped permitting burials. The terminally ill and the elderly are now transported by medical aircraft to the Norwegian mainland to die, so that their bodies can be properly received by warmer ground. In Svalbard, even death must be scheduled and managed around the constraints of the frozen earth. The Reykjanes Peninsula in southwestern Iceland is the only place on Earth where a mid-ocean ridge, the seam between 2 tectonic plates, rises above sea level and can be walked across on dry land. For 800 years, between 1226 and 2021, this section of the ridge was volcanically dormant. Then, in March of 2021, after nearly a millennium of silence, it erupted. And it has not stopped since. Between 2021 and 2026, the Reykjanes Peninsula has experienced 8 separate eruption events. Each eruption opens new fissures, cracks in the Earth's surface from which lava emerges at temperatures between 1,800 and 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. The lava flows have destroyed multiple sections of major road infrastructure, forced the permanent evacuation of the town of Grindavik, population 3,400, on 3 separate occasions, and encroached upon the region's geothermal power plant. Volcanologists have identified Reykjanes as having entered a new eruptive cycle, a period of repeated volcanic activity that historical records suggest could last 300 to 500 years without pause. The peninsula is, in the most literal geological sense, currently being rebuilt. New land is being created from lava at a rate measurable week by week. The Blue Lagoon Geothermal Spa, one of Iceland's most visited tourist attractions, has been evacuated and temporarily closed 4 times since 2023 due to lava advance. It has reopened each time. As of this year, it continues operating within view of actively flowing lava, separated from molten rock by engineered berms and the calculated predictions of volcanologists who freely acknowledge that their models have limits. Iceland is not a country that happens to have volcanoes. It is a volcanic system that happens to have a country built on top of it. Lake Natron in northern Tanzania is recognized as one of the most chemically hostile bodies of water on the surface of the earth. It is a soda lake, fed not by rainfall but by mineral-rich hydrothermal springs that carry sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and calcium carbonate from the volcanic geology beneath it. The lake's pH ranges between 9 and 10.5, making it caustic enough to corrode aluminum and to cause chemical burns on unprotected human skin after sustained contact. Its temperature, driven by hydrothermal input, reaches between 104 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface during peak conditions. The combination of heat and alkalinity creates a body of water that, for virtually every known species on Earth, is immediately lethal. The lake's name derives from natron, the sodium compound that ancient Egyptians used to preserve mummies. Lake Natron performs the same function involuntarily. Birds, bats, and other animals that die in or near the lake are rapidly calcified by its mineral waters. Their tissues replaced by sodium carbonate deposits, their bodies preserved in precise detail, wings extended, feet frozen mid-step, exactly as they appeared at the moment of death. Photographer Nick Brent documented dozens of these calcified animals along the lake's shoreline in 2013. A fish eagle preserved in mid-dive, flamingos standing as if still alive, their feathers replaced by white mineral crystal. Remarkably, Lake Natron supports the breeding ground of approximately 2.5 million lesser flamingos, over 75% of the world's entire population. The same alkalinity that calcifies every other species provides the flamingos with protection from predators, who cannot tolerate the lake's chemistry. The flamingos nest on salt islands, surrounded by caustic water, raising their chicks in an environment so hostile it becomes paradoxically the safest place on Earth for them to exist. This planet does not simply challenge life. Sometimes, it turns its most lethal environments into the only place where certain life can survive at all. From the furnace floor of Death Valley, where the air itself becomes a weapon, to the calcified shores of Lake Natron, where death is preserved in mineral crystal, we have crossed 12 environments where survival does not simply require effort. It requires the complete abandonment of every assumption about what a habitable planet looks like. These places are not anomalies. They are reminders. Reminders that the thin, temperate band of the Earth's surface that humans have claimed as home represents a fraction of what this world actually is. The planet does not owe us comfort. It never agreed to our presence. And in 12 locations scattered across its surface, it continues to make that point with extraordinary geological clarity. Which of these 12 hellish environments surprised you most? Let us know in the comments below. And if this kind of content, real science, real stakes, real places, is what you are here for, consider subscribing. We have more of this world left to explore.